Hello and what's up, political peeps? Per usual, I am your host, Arif Kapoor. With Republican candidate for Congress from Connecticut's 4th Congressional District, Daniel Miressi. Daniel, welcome to the Geopolitical.
Thanks, Arav. Good to have you. Very
Yeah,
cool.
you have a really cool story, and you're running in a primary race against Dr. Michael Goldstein to go and represent the Republican Party, be on the Republican line for the November 3rd general election against Congressman Jim Himes, who's been around for a long time. So definitely super interesting story. Just to dive in before we start talking about this race and your political experience, talk to me a little bit about your life growing up, that kind of thing. I know you were born and raised in Connecticut. What did you do growing up that kind of has led you towards your political aspirations today?
Well, if I'm being honest with you, you're a young guy. You're 15, right? I assume your audience is a little younger. That's the one thing I can tell you, regardless of how you think your politics is nothing that you're interested in life, whether it's just a hobby or whatever. You never know where that skill or that interest is going to take you when you become an adult. I just turned 37, and I grew up pretty, normal 90s kind of. If you've ever watched those 90s movies, that's the way Fairfield County was. Believe it or not, it was a pretty bipartisan time. Republicans and Democrats had their little squabbles, but they were really ancillary issues, budget stuff but we agreed on basics, which are things that, my campaign's about, which is family, community, economy, immigration, crime, affordability, all that good stuff. And, I think I grew up, my dad worked for the post office. My mom was just a regular, secretary, to put it in layman's terms. And, I went to public schools. I played sports, Little League. We were latchkey kids, that last generation who ran outside and had the beautiful parks. And, I was thinking the other day, one of my favorite memories to think back on is when I was around your age, like 16, 17 years old. And you could get 4 or 5 guys, you can pile up in a car. I know you can't do that now, but at the time you could. And you could take $20, right? Everyone throw in $5, and you have $25, whatever. And you could go to McDonald's and have a field day. You could or you could go to the movies or walk around the mall and just kind of just make a little bit of an afternoon. And the point I'm bringing that up is that was my childhood, kind of an America that feels like it's dying. And I was a hockey guy. I went to Trumbull High. I played juniors. I played in college a little bit. I tried my best at playing professional. I had a little bit of a stint, but when I got back, I was working. I worked for the post office. I put up tents. I was trying to really find myself in my 20s. I had a relationship that didn't work out, and just a lot of life. And my mom got sick, and all those things kind of led me to where I am now, where I have a great partner that we've been doing this since 2022, when I ran against Bob Duff, it was great that it happened. I don't regret it, but it was, accidental. I went there kind of like you to get involved. I wanted to bring a message for people under 40 who are trying to get married and start families and buy a house and, secure a job and have a working economy for everyone. And at the time, Bob Stefanowski was the governor candidate, and it led me to be a candidate against Bob Duff. And since then, I've stuck around because I've met a lot of good people. And, I know you fall a little more on the Democrat side, but I truly believe that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And I'm running to kind of be that other side of what America can be and what we can do going into the future. And I do think there's a Republican argument for it. And, I look forward to hearing some more of your questions.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. And, looking back at that kind of more simple version of America that you're describing, it's not something I've ever experienced. And, I think you mentioned this, that everybody, we were able to kind of come together around communities and be closer together and tighter knit as a country. So actually, if you'll allow me to insert my own anecdote, I got involved in politics just because I thought that in 2024, so not all that long ago, 2 years ago, when I thought
You were 15.
The presidential election was so divisive, and Donald Trump had just gotten shot, and there were disturbing language coming from both sides of the aisle. And I thought that young people my age, even your age, when Congress is like 65, 70 years old, it's up to us to break the status quo and hopefully maybe restore that kind of civility. So regardless, I think, of what side of the aisle you come from, being able to sit down at the table is something that a lot of folks can't do these days, and I wish more people can. And I think, based on the way that you're telling me about your appreciation of the time period where life was a lot more simple, I think that you're a kind of candidate that would be able to, if you got your seat at the table. So now, you mentioned that come 2022, you got involved, kind of got pulled in to run for the 25th district. You took your first fight all the way up to the Senate Majority Leader's office. That's a pretty big first run for office. Talk to me a little bit about that race.
Yeah, well, that was serendipitous, honestly. Is you never know how things work out. And, I think it's why I'm here today, and I earned the primary 40% of the ballot at the convention. And now on Tuesday, it'll be up to the people to decide. And I'm honored to have that chance. But, I think running against Bob Duff, who was the majority leader, really was getting thrown right into the fire in the political world. And I had no experience. I actually just resigned from the post office because they have a Hatch Act type of thing. And what a lot of people don't know is, I call her the first lady, my partner, is we've always kind of been anti-establishment. I have nothing against the great Republicans, and I'm a Republican, all the way through. I of course I support the party, but I'd be lying to you if I didn't think that there's a lot of problems within it. There's a lot of, generational Republicans that don't really understand what the younger generations are going through. And it's very easy to scream about the free market when you have a home ownership or you're living in Greenwich. And, they like to talk about the middle class, but, the middle class is, what defines it anymore? No one really knows anymore because everyone's living paycheck to paycheck. And that was kind of the energy I brought into Bob Duff. And it's still the same energy. It's just, obviously a little different. And what that taught me is, that politics is, it's definitely something not of the light of heart. And to bring it back to when I was talking about the first lady, it's just been the two of us, all the tweets, graphics, events. We have no campaign, real staff besides volunteers. We have no consultants, because I think what politics has taught me is that people are looking for candidates, regardless of where they stand on the issues. Obviously they're not crazy. But they want authenticity. They want people to feel like they can meet them where they are. And when I was going around with Bob Duff, what's interesting is I have Norwalk and Darien. I don't know how much you know about that, but one place has a median income of like 200,000. The other's a median income of like 70,000. Plus, with an inner city, just two completely different worlds right next to each other. And I kind of felt a draw where, I'm in a unique opportunity where I understand, a little bit from my experience with being a hockey coach and being in that world, and, living, the hardships that some of the people in Norwalk are living. That's really what helped me try to get a platform of family, community, economy. Of my slogan right now is CT forward, the forward, because I do think that politics is about people, and we should be solution oriented and bring bold ideas to the table rather than falling back on, I like Reagan next to just as much as the next guy. But I think we should be talking about 2056, not 1986. Don't you think, my guy?
I think that's a really meaningful message. I think Republicans, the slogan is "Make America Great Again," but looking forward rather than again is, I think, a nice way to put it. So you mentioned that you kind of got yourself involved in the 2026 candidacy for U.S. Congress. Dr. Michael Goldstein ran for this seat in 2024 as well.
2022.
He did in 2022 too?
Yep, and 2020. Yep, he's been hanging around for a while.
Well, in 2022, he wasn't on the general election ballot. In 2024, he was. He faced
Yep.
Congressman Jim Himes, and he got probably, I think it was about 37% of the vote. So Congressman Himes won by almost 15 points over Michael Goldstein. Now you're bringing a new voice to the space at the convention, like you mentioned. I think you got 36% of the delegates, about 40%. And now you're vying to challenge Michael Goldstein for the opportunity to represent the Republican line on the ballot. Talk to me about what sets you apart from Dr. Goldstein. I know that at the convention, a lot of the people, I watched the speeches of the folks who nominated you, and a lot of people emphasized that Dr. Goldstein has tried this, he didn't win, and you're more winnable. But in terms of policy, what really sets you apart from your fellow Republican?
Well, I think that Mr. Goldstein is, first of all, I think the race is more about, him wanting the seat rather than, what solutions. A lot of the solutions and the way he approaches his policies about what he thinks is the best idea, which, I believe in constitutional ideas, but, we have to be pragmatic. The world and, it's a complicated place.
Right.
And, when it comes to things like energy, I think it's a national security issue. I think that if we're energy, infrastructure, even, I know you like, the other side likes to talk about transportation. I think all of that should be treated like highway systems, like the train. If we're going to compete in the 21st century, we have to be bold. And that's going to take a little bit of government partnership. That doesn't mean government does it. What it means is that government releases the shackles of business, creates opportunity zones like in Bridgeport, and tries to really move forward the idea of creating something new, a new economic agenda. Dr. Goldstein is for these, forever wars. He's been a big advocate of, toppling the Iranian regime and doing whatever he can to support Israel. I support our allies and I support global security, but at the same time, I grew up in the Middle East war era, and 20 years of a lot of blue collar kids dying, of some that I knew. And for what? That time I was talking about in high school, gas was $1.32 a gallon.
Right.
And I know people say, oh, that's natural inflation. Yeah, natural inflation would have made it like what it should be, like $2.50 a gallon, not over $4. And if Republicans are, at least down here, there's more to being a Republican than the country club. I get in trouble sometimes because I say they're the country club Republicans, and there is some truth to that. I can only sit so many times and eat cold chicken at a Lincoln Reagan dinner and hear about how good the Dow is doing and their 401ks. Well, our generation, most of us don't have that. We're still paying for policies that they're enacting. We're $39 trillion in debt. And to me, we have to start looking out for a mainstream class and things like a flat tax. It's not good enough to say, let's make tax cuts permanent. And it's not good enough just to be another rubber stamp for all Republican policies. We have to be creative. And I think Dr. Goldstein, he's 78 years old. And I think people are just tired. They're just tired of having that same tired kind of talking down, pick yourself up by your bootstraps type of thing. Well, the bootstraps are on fire. Not all of us bought a house for $50,000 in 1988 and it's now worth $950,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that to slight Republicans or capitalism. No, 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 no. I'm saying that because we need to recognize the reality on the ground. And if we want to defeat democratic socialism, we have to start thinking outside the box of just, Reaganomics. Let's try something new. And I'm trying to represent a new way forward and policies that is actually going to bring back American dominance and domestic dominance and jobs and community for people, something that we can be proud of our future for. And I think Dr. Goldstein is more concerned about conserving the past.
So combining that constitutionalism and that conservatism with a vision for the future and a vision for, the next generation here in Connecticut.
Yeah, exactly. And, for a lot of my Republican fellows, we have to use a current phrase for you kids, is we have an ageism problem. in the Republican Party a little bit,
Mhm.
where and I'm not saying this. Please, some of the people I still read to this day, Thomas Sowell. I mean, Clarence Thomas, they're elder statesmen. And the people around here, God bless the life that they created for us, the Republican values that they've instilled. But there is no really torch bearing,
Mhm.
passing of the torch. And, I think going back to the high school and the education that I got growing up around here, we were taught to read the Constitution not as a living, breathing document, but as something that can be applied to every generation and how we should apply it the best we can. And to me, my politics come from a place of, like Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt, even Richard Nixon, people who are trying to bring America into a new generation of greatness and with new constitutional based policies. One of the things, like JFK is actually another one of my favorite presidents, and one of the things that he tried to do was institute things like the La Sierra program for educational purposes and physical education, use government to further a GI Bill where people had the opportunity to expedite building houses and getting low interest loans. When it comes to student loans, with Republicans, it's one thing to pay back a loan that you get. It's another thing to get cajoled into becoming a serf. And I remember being at Trumbull High, it was our senior year. We'd have, okay, class, go to the gym. We went to the gymnasium. You go across to all the things, you get your applications, your guidance. Like, it's just what you did. They basically told you if you don't take out $100,000 and go to a small state school, you're going to be a failure in life. And, we have to be compassionate conservatives again. We have to be forward thinking conservatives, and we have to be energetic. Most people aren't Republicans because they never met one they liked most of the time.
It's very interesting, and I really value the fact that you acknowledged JFK's accomplishments as president, even as a Republican. But I'm curious that this unique perspective on conservatism you bring, which honestly I wish more Republicans brought to the table. Where will that put you in the House of Representatives? Obviously, this seat is the 4th district with Speaker Mike Johnson's very slim majority in the House
Mm-hmm.
would be a major flip for Republicans if you were able to, and it could possibly secure the majority in the House of Representatives. But over the past, 10 years since President Trump has been involved in politics, him and his MAGA movement have kind of made sure that Congress stays in line in a way. You've seen, like with Senator Bill Cassidy out of Louisiana, or across the country, instances of Republicans who have faced primary challenges because of their lack of allegiance to President Trump. Now, I think that a lot of what you stand for probably aligns with him, but there are some things which you seem to be a little bit more forward-looking on than the president. So how would you handle that between the Speaker, House leadership, and President Trump if this is such a crucial seat for Republicans to hold, if you're able to win it?
Well, to me, there are certain things, and this is where my athlete background comes in. I know everyone says this all the time, but I never wanted. Of course, am I trying to be a politician? I'm absolutely trying to be a politician. That's the job. I think you want your politicians to be good politicians. But I look at it no further than the definition of that word, which is try to make deals in Congress, try to do the best by my district. But if I was elected, I only serve two things: Constitution first, my constituents second. And obviously, you're at the behest of the president and majority leaders, but those aren't my two main driving factors. And when it comes to President Trump, two things can be true at once. I've been on the Trump train back from 2010 when he was doing radio interviews on Michael Savage. I love Mr. Trump. What he's done to forward Republican politics in my lifetime is something, it's historical. And I voted for him 3 times. But as I said, I think, he would respect the fact that I have that little bit of a New Yorker in me. I'm a hockey guy where it's just, I think that part of my job would be to change the conversation, like when it comes to things like omnibus bill spending, like I think it should be line item. I do not think that you should have crazy $1 trillion spending bills that, inflation is really just a tax on working people. You know, I'm not a corporatist, Wall Street. I don't think that, you know, I think that we need to bifurcate interest loans. It's ridiculous that, you somehow have these big companies that can take out hundreds of $1 million in credit lines, or you have quantitative easing, which is printing money. And then the average homeowner is living with these inflated prices. Most people wouldn't mind a 15% interest rate if they could put down $20,000 and, get a house at back at like a real market rate. And I'm saying all that to say is I have a phrase on my campaign where there's no bipartisanship with the Bolshevik. And Republicans are, if you've noticed, everyone's screaming about socialism. We're fighting socialism. We're fighting and, I don't think it's the same as, the Russians are coming, but I do think it's a 21st century new brand. And I think Republicans need to look at this as an opportunity instead of, pointing and crying wolf and, blaming everything on the Democrats. We should be the leaders again. And that is really what I would try to be in Congress is, trust me, I'm not going to be voting for any, amnesty for this or, legals. But when it comes to, military appropriations, Congress controls the power of the purse from the military. When it comes to that, funding the Iran war, which is something that, at the end of the day, I don't think it's a net positive when it's coming down to something where it's kind of BB decision making that's affecting American citizens' pockets, which is, the guys who are punching the clock. How can I in good conscience vote for that because, President Trump or Mike Johnson is trying to cajole me into doing that? I don't need that type of thing. Like I said, is my real team, my identity is, at the end of the day, a hockey player. So I don't think those external pressures will really affect me. And like I said, I'm loyal to the country and I'll always be loyal to the America First agenda. So, and President Trump is going to be gone in 2 years. I know he'll still be out, but we got to stop. Again, I appreciate everything he's done, but if, I win or come back in 2028, there'll be a whole new set of Republican candidates for president, a whole new thing. And everyone's talking about President Trump. I'm more worried about what is going to be the Republican Party going to look like after that. How do we take the America First agenda, the Citizen First agenda, and apply it to the next 10 years, the next 15 years? Because if we don't do that, at least socialism, they have a plan. I don't agree with it, but they are presenting a plan, an alternative. Mondami is doing that. And, Republicans should be watching instead of just screaming about it.
And I want to address socialism, and I appreciate that perspective. Just to finish on this Republican point, has anybody from either as a Republican candidate for Congress from the Speaker's office or House Republicans reached out to you?
No, and actually, this is, again, I don't mean this in a vanity way, because at the end of the day, we like I said, when we ran against Bob Duff, we didn't take the state CEP money. We raised $2,000 from all little small donors, and we got 12,000 votes. Just the First Lady and I running around on rollerblades, whatever. And I'm saying all that to say, granted, of course, people could donate more and, there could be more excitement, but it's the state party that's been pretty apathetic about investing in all districts and in candidates. I think it's important to invest in, every election season. And when it comes to the national GOP, they allegedly got all this money on tap. The Democrats are smart. Just because a race on paper nothing's unwinnable. A campaign is only as good as their candidates. And sure, maybe it'll take a couple election cycles, but you can't complain about having slim majorities if you're not going to invest in new messages or creative characters. You look at AOC, you look at the Democrats right now in the state with Josh Elliott and all those things. They're pouring money in it because they believe healthy competition is good. They want to keep their voters engaged. So, in short, no, I haven't, but it is a little bit of a picadillo with me because, just for the overall message to the voters, what does that say? It's no different to me, to bring back the sports analogy. It's no different to me that if the New York Yankees, they could sign, they're just not signing free agents because they want to save money. Well, then what's the point of running a baseball team? What's the point of being a fan if you're not going to try to win? And that's kind of where I stand on that.
I really appreciate the sports analogies. Although you'll never see me running or holding a baseball bat. I'm not a big sports guy. I stick more to the political world. Although I
Yeah.
really appreciate the sports analogies. Last question, kind of on this topic. Why do you think that when Jim Himes was first elected in 2008, and every year he's practically developed more of a margin against his Republican challenger, and like we said, Dr. Goldstein lost by almost 15 points. Why do you think that you can go and meet and take on and beat the ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, longtime member of Congress, and respected member of the Connecticut delegation?
Well, I think that that's the American way. I think that Americans like an underdog story.
But
And,
why you specifically?
well, because I think that I represent a new type of candidate. You know, trust me, I do a lot of thinking on this, and which is why I read a lot about, policy. I do my best to listen and learn, and I'll always be learning on the job. That's 1% better every day, another sports analogy. But in this social media world and everything, I think it comes down to you want your candidates to be good communicators. You want
Mhm.
them to be accessible. And overall, I'm running because I'm living it. At the end of the day, Jim Himes, like anything else, Congress was never supposed to be this kind of deity position or this priesthood. And I actually don't think Jim Himes is a bad guy. I actually don't think so. But at the end of the day, he represents the other side of that establishment. He's made $15 million in Congress. You said he's elected in 2009. I graduated high school in '07. I wasn't, really that dialed in. But I can tell you what, from 2007 to 2026, in these 20 years, and I went to school in Massachusetts. I traveled around, blah, 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 back landing home here. Life is not better than it was in 2009. I can guarantee you that. The certain things are better, obviously, but I'm talking about on like a core level of financial mobility and, all that stuff that we were talking about before. And that's all been under Jim Himes' watch. You know, how can he walk into the city of Bridgeport and say, "Is your life better since I've been in Congress?" The answer is unequivocally no. And to me, I look at those things differently. I grew up, I learned how to skate at Wonderland Device. I think it should be a Republican value that our cities should be beautiful and they should be fixed. Just as much I think it's a Republican value. Like eat the rich is a stupid slogan. Like God bless those people who are creating wealth and jobs and taxes. But I
And
also don't,
innovation, and
and
progression.
innovation. But I also don't think private equity should be making 100% returns gambling on the American economy. Jim Himes kind of is on that Goldman Sachs side, which is where he worked. And I think that, the only thing constant in life is change. And I think I can offer a different type of candidate, a different type of republicanism. And I think, I'm relatable, in a different way. And I would just like the opportunity to litigate my case. And I can tell you one thing, I will have way more energy and I will try to earn every vote where I think Heim will just try to count every vote.
I like that, my friend. I actually had Josh Elliott on the show about 2 weeks ago, and I raised that point to him that his slogan is "tax the rich, right? Tax the top 1%." But my family's not part of the top 1%, and we're not creating any jobs. We're not making iPhones and AI that help so many people, and we're not providing any innovation. So maybe the increase in taxes, that's our contribution to the economy. So I don't think it's as plain as simple as these Democrat socialists, make it seem. You mentioned it a few times. I think it's really important to address this kind of rise from the insurgent left on the Democratic Party. I think Jim Himes is still an establishment Democrat in some sense of the imagination, but a lot of Democrats aren't anymore and are standing for really dangerous values that are really un-American. But I think at the same time, this all goes back to extremism in the United States because, well, these insurgent left values are un-American and undemocratic and probably won't work out for the country. At the same time, the extremism and divisiveness from the far right of the Republican Party, which isn't is
Can I ask you
also
a question?
yeah, sure.
What what perturbs you like, what do you think is the most extreme on the right side? And then what do you think is the most extreme on the left side? Just so I can have a better gauge of my answer here.
Well, I think on the left we look to people like AOC and
The
people
tax
like
the rich crowd, all that, eat the rich, all that.
Rashida Tlaib,
Okay.
who don't seem to believe in the greatness of America. And then on the right, I look at people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, who are so to the right that it gets in the way of them working together with fellow Republicans.
Yeah, they're like too libertarian. It's like stupid.
So I know I told you before we hopped on that I work for Democrats in Connecticut, but at the same time, I'm not. I think about people based on their values, not based on their party, and I believe in a lot of the things Republicans try to do in Congress, and I hate when people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey get in the way of stuff like that. But my question is, I had Senator Blumenthal on the show a couple of weeks ago, back at the beginning
some
of
big
July.
hitters on here.
And we talked about this, and Congress's approval rating is at an all-time low by the American public. Him and I both agreed that means a systemic change is needed. That means that this polarization from Rashida Tlaib and AOC and Rand Paul and Thomas Massey doesn't work for us. So if and when you get elected to Congress in January of 2027, if you take your seat, what will you do to systemically make Congress serve the people better and maybe increase that approval rating?
That's a good question. Ironic, because before we got on here, I was just reading AOC was on one of those shows like Sunday Morning or Meet the Press, one of them, and she said that woke one was a little too crazy, which is funny, which kind of means that maybe she's trying to bring it back, Congress, and who knows, positioning for the future. I think a lot of Democrats are seeing the insurgent left and are trying to find a new identity as well as Republicans. A lot of them are, like you said, either way too libertarian or in the way, just kind of grandstanders, or just way too much on the Trump train, where it's just like, okay, like,
yeah,
you can support Trump, but still also have to do your job, which is being a congressman.
The speaker even gets hit, like, for falling in line.
Exactly. Between me and you, I'm not the biggest fan of him, but obviously I'd work with anyone. But to answer your question, it's a theme of it. I'm gonna give you another sports analogy. We have a saying. It's not. I mean, it's a regular thing, but the only way out is through. Is one of the things that we say. If you're in a tough game, or you're in a hard, you're training, and you just you got to do one more mile. Like, there's no other option but to just run another mile. And I'm saying that because I do think there has to be. And you could do it more tastefully, but there has to be a little more bluntness in Congress. One of the things the First Lady says all the time, which cracks me up, is she doesn't like when it comes down to business, like real business, the Fairfield County politeness and kind of, this kind of pretending, and talking in sound bites and not being honest with the American people or being honest with your colleagues. That's something that I would like to change. It's funny. I'm reading Dave Portnoy's book. I'm a Barstool guy because 2010 was when they blew up, and that was my freshman or sophomore year in college, and I was in Boston basically. So I was right there and he has one of the things in his book, and it's kind of the way I think why social media has become the way it is he was talking about how his business took off when he started publishing the good, the bad, and the ugly of the insider, the emails with the publishers, or the squabbles with the employees, basically real time HR and real time, and I think that that's a difference in our generation. And if we get to Congress, I mean, I really don't care, but I would like to take some of the things that even Democrats do, which you don't see on the Republican side, which is radical transparency. Why shouldn't I hop on a live stream and say exactly what you said? Like, I don't know, Johnny Tsunami over here he doesn't like the bill because he wants, this provision in for all of his lobbyists, even if he's a Republican. Tell the people that.
Right.
We have the power to do this thing, and I hate this obfuscation and this whole oh, well, we don't do it that way. Like, why? It's not like the other way was working. Seems like my parents had a way better time, going from accomplishing their dreams than my generation does.
Right.
So yeah, and I guess that's where I'm kind of always been a little bit. I was a little guy playing hockey. I've always kind of been a little bit of a rebel without a cause. Is I think the House of Representatives and Congress, if you go back and look at those, I was a history major. If you go back and look at the 1700s, the 1800s, I'm not saying we should start throwing fists in Congress like they did back in the day, but it should be a place where it's more combative in a healthy way, where it's more of like operates like a boardroom, like a company, not just this kind of grandstanding thing where we can have these hearings and just talk in sound bites for the evening news. Like, I don't know, that's stupid. I don't,
Right.
nothing
And
of
like
that.
people are like asking questions at oversight hearings,
Yeah, and
like for Instagram clips. Who won the 2020 election? The 2020 election is behind us. Let's look forward.
yeah, yeah. Like, I don't know, like, what's the name of your goldfish? Like, who cares? Like, it's that type of thing. And I guess that's where I would hope to, like I said, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people on the left that would disagree with me, but I hope to bring that energy to Congress, that kind of new age, we grew up with social media, the bar stool, the behind the scenes type of thing. That type of energy to Congress is what I would like to bring, where, it's time for, the new kids are in class now, and let's govern based off of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's like it isn't working for the people. This procedure of kind of wasting everybody's time isn't working. So to really shake it up,
Not everything has to be Robert's rules,
right. I mean, what's the good? And Mr. Speaker, I move to motion and move to whatever.
But that's
it doesn't serve the vote.
I got to get this in case one of the two Republican primary voters watch your show. But that's one of the things you asked, where again you can use platforms to litigate. Like, imagine if I get elected to Congress, I would hope it became I'd blow up like AOC or something, and then get a platform like that, right?
I think you could.
Yeah, and if I got a platform like that where you call us a Republican, I'd be screaming from the rooftops at how stupid it is that we have to read these 800 page bills for infrastructure. Like, one page, like all the things, you know what I mean?
Like $800 billion building,
yes,
no waste,
no different than I used to work up putting up tents. No different than the contract. Okay, you got 40 chairs, a 20 by 20 tent. That's going to be $8,000. Done. Sign on the dotted line. Okay, we're going to build a new Francis T. Cott Bridge. We're going to help give money to Bridgeport Harbor Yard. We're going to send money to Sacramento. I don't know, whatever. So, 10 cities on the list. $2 billion. Done. Move that page over, Mr. Speaker. Next line. You know what I mean? There's ways to start doing that,
and that will really make Congress more efficient. Now, Mr. Miressi, I don't want to keep taking up more of your time. We've addressed.
My fault. I'm a rambler,
No. I really, really appreciate your perspective. And I think we've addressed a lot of the biggest topics that you're running on that really relate to the way that Congress serves the people, which it doesn't do the best job at anymore. And I think people from across the aisle can appreciate that. The one thing that factions are forming on both sides of the aisle, more on the left, but I think it's trickling over to the right too. Israel. Right? People, you mentioned this before, that sometimes seems like Benjamin Netanyahu is pulling more triggers in the House of Representatives than Speaker Johnson, which is kind of concerning that we're sending so much money and military resources to Israel. Would you unilaterally support Israel if you're elected to Congress?
Absolutely not. No way.
So what would your position be on the conflict and the U.S.'s role to go and be a peacemaker outside of the U.S.?
So I have, good question. I'm now going to probably take up another 3 or 4 minutes of your time, because it's not as simple as Israel's causing all our problems and we're fighting on behalf of Netanyahu. I don't believe that. Here's the thing: it's very easy to talk about a lot of these things. We're not the president. We're not the national security. We don't know the information that they have. So we don't know, what Iran is up to. And it goes all the way back to Obama. It's been, actually all the way back to 1979. Iran has been a state sponsor of terrorism, blah, 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 blah. and they can't have a nuclear weapon. All those things are true. That being said, we've been on this Gulf War, expedition since 1990. And a lot of it has seemed to be influenced from, the prime minister's palace in Israel. And especially now, it's becoming a relationship where it seems a little too close for comfort. You know, we still belong to NATO. Obviously, we put the bill with that, but I view Israel no different than Italy or Ireland or anything like that. Every ally should be looked at on a bilateral basis. And to me, even when it comes to the Middle East, we have a good relationship with the Saudis and we have to push for peace in that region. I do believe the best way forward is like anything, economic investment and trying to really, bring their economies into the 21st century global economy, not just kind of stuck in, they get live golf or something once in a while. You can't have despotic regimes running around. And when it comes to national security, global security, I believe this is why I'm a strong believer in America first, Americans first, and domestic dominance. We learned during COVID that not having supply chains, especially with strategic materials, which I think you need to keep tariffs on for that reason, which would pressure a lot of our enemies like Russia, China, and Iran. I think that, anyone who isn't being honest with themselves thinks that Europe, when it comes to being a global military threat, matters. Europe's done when it comes to that. They have their things they're special at, like Great Britain with their MI6 and all that. But, it's really the American dominance and all their supporting players if, there'd ever be a conflict like that. And then it's China. You only have American interests and Chinese interests. And I think that instead of being halfway across the world trying to secure oil in, the Strait of Hormuz or trying to go to war with China over chips in Taiwan, we should actually be really focused on, which I do think Mr. Trump has done a good job, and Mr. Rubio and Venezuela and all that. But I'm a big believer that we need to be solidifying the Western hemisphere, our supply chains here. China's trying to build a Silk Road. We should be trying to do the same in the Americas, going down in, trying to scour for resources. The real global security comes with Americans having jobs. One of my favorite fun facts is car manufacturing. Do you know that China would love for America's car manufacturing to go fully remote overseas? Not because they want to sell more cars to us. They can sell us anything. We buy plenty of cheap Chinese stuff from Amazon, but because one of the easiest things to convert to a military operation in a time of war is a car manufacturing place.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and they would have, if Ford GM moved to Beijing, they would have all access to all those patents and all. So it's not as binary as that. And I think if we still are operating on a foreign policy that A, it seems like Israel might be directing in certain areas, and B, even more so, it's a policy coming straight out of the Cold War. I just don't see how that's prudent for defense spending or American security or just the American people in general.
So if obviously given that, and it seems like you're going to take a perspective where you won't rubber stamp policy about
Mr. Goldstein definitely would. Mr. Goldstein, he's never seen a bill with Israel he didn't like. I'll tell you that.
But it seems like you won't abandon our ally. Is that correct?
No, absolutely. Like that's the other thing is Republicans can't be on the other side where they, we like to criticize Joe Biden over how he got out of Iraq. One of my favorite phrases, two things can be true at once. I actually appreciated that Biden got out of Iraq, after all that. And it doesn't seem like it turned out that bad. Iraq is selling us oil and all that. We had a pretty good partnership. Trump just signed a good trade deal with them. But, we can't do the same thing now. We have to find a diplomatic, peaceful way. We can't let Iran just blow up Israel because we decide, we started this thing. We got into this mess. We have to prudently get out. But I think the priority should be to find a diplomatic solution, not try to escalate something. And then, just like anything else, like student loan business or the housing market, bailout business, whatever, the United States government, when it comes to foreign policy issues, needs to start focusing on domestically how those foreign decisions affect our homeland. There's nothing more important than security, than our own borders, than our own cities, than our own manufacturing capabilities, than our own even healthcare, having a healthy population. So like, to me, that's where I prioritize.
And the joke that people make, I think, across the aisle, but mainly conservatives, is that once somebody has a chance of being elected to Congress, APAC or APAC adjacent organization will come to them and offer them a large sum of money. Just looking at the Track APAC website, they quote Congressman Himes for having received $76,408 from Israeli PACs. Would you commit to not taking money from any pro-Israeli or APAC adjacent organizations if elected to Congress?
Yeah, absolutely. I would never, and not just APAC, I would never take money on behalf of any foreign lobby, any foreign country. Like, again, my duty is to the Constitution and the citizens of Connecticut. If they want to donate, if certain American PACs or, whatever, God bless, but everything, again, like everything I have is, I don't ever want to be beholden to anyone. It's certainly not Israel and certainly not any other foreign country. Like I said, Connecticut first, America first, always, only.
All right, Daniel, I really appreciate it. I think that addresses most of my questions, and it was a pleasure to get to know you. As we wrap up here, I always like to do a quick lightning round of questions.
Exciting.
Shall we start?
I'm ready.
5 or 6 of them.
Yeah.
All right. Once you come to Congress, if you get elected in January of 2027, what would be the first bill that you would propose on behalf of the residents of Connecticut's 4th Congressional District?
Energy becoming falling under national security provisions. National Security Act, National Defense Act is really what it's called.
Looking at Congress today, who's your favorite member of Congress?
Brandon Gill. Love that guy.
I'm on the same page. Name of Democrat you respect.
Honestly, I respect the hell out of AOC. I really do. I respect how she brands and communicates, and I think Republicans can learn a lot from her. Not policy-wise, not anything politics. I don't want this to get clipped. But when it comes to how she markets herself, because, Republicans do a really bad job at branding, and I think that's why a lot of people don't vote for them.
Right. And on that note, would you support term limits for members of Congress?
Yes, but I think it should be equivalent to 2 terms in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, if 12 years, I think that should be the maximum. Mm-hmm. Because, if you really wanted to affect real change in a district, you probably need a good decade to make the relationships you need and to learn how everything works, to bring, solutions back. So, I believe in term limits shouldn't be a lifetime position, but there should definitely be a cap.
Okay. Your favorite restaurant in the 4th Congressional District?
Oh, my favorite restaurant in the 4th District. I'm gonna have to go with Red Rooster.
Did you phone a friend?
I confirmed with the First Lady just because, when it's all said and done, that's our go-to. It's like right under being bougie, and the food is it's very comfort. But Red Rooster, yeah, it's an incredible food. It's in Wilton, right? It's in Wilton, right on the Wilton line.
All right, really amazing. Once again, it's been a pleasure to get to know you today. The one thing I did want to mention, actually, before we wrap up, is that I did reach out to your opponent in the Republican primary, Dr. Goldstein, and offered him a position to join the show. He didn't reply, so I'm grateful that you responded, and we were able to get something set up so quickly, even in the height of primary campaign season. I wish you the very best of luck during your race, and if you advance to the general election, we'll do something again in October.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you want to talk, man. Appreciate it.
All right, it's a pleasure. Political peeps, you guys know the drill. This was Republican congressional candidate from Connecticut's 4th Congressional District, Dan Miressi. Peace out, folks.